Kansas City, Missouri. And I guess my question is something you've kind of been alluding to in a lot of your answers, but I'd like to hear kind of more directly from you. It's just, what is your opinion on the state of the Republican Party as it exists right now? And kind of what is your plan as a Republican candidate to sort of rectify a lot of the errors or mistakes that have been made by your party in the past? And how are you going to be kind of a unifying force for the divisiveness that exists in your party and also just as a whole?
That was great. 4 questions. All good.
My name is Jake. I'm from Houston, Texas, and my question is sort of going back to what you were talking about with energy. You mentioned, one, that the decisions we're making now politically are going to affect especially our generation for the long-term future. And so with that energy independence that we were talking about and having American-made energy, what role do you see green and renewable energy being, and how soon do you see that becoming a major part alongside our fossil fuels as that phases out in the future?
DuPont. Curious how you're planning to get your lofty goals accomplished.
Get my...
Your goals.
Oh, okay.
I'm a little curious to see how you're going to manage to do this. I got one other question. Are you prepared for the den of vipers and utter depravity that Washington, D.C. has become?
That's a yes or no question, yes.
It is.
You mentioned about social media, like 40% of people are bots. Is that right? What do you think of the thing Nikki Haley mentioned a couple days ago about people verifying with like names on social media?
That's a quick answer, which is that's direct violation of First Amendment free speech, and so that's not gonna fly.
Hey, I'm Lily from Elkins Park, Pennsylvania, and my question is related a lot to yours. A lot of American infrastructure is about 70 years old or even older. How do you plan to address that, along with climate change and how that's going to impact American infrastructure? Do you plan to address how a lot of American infrastructure is also entirely car-based? Thank you.
Okay. Good stuff. That's a good thing, and I'll wrap it all into one kind of closing thing. But let me start with the Republican Party piece. The Republican Party's got big challenges because we very little interest with people at age 30 or below. Strongest membership is people that are aging. That means, even from 2016 to 2024, between those 2 elections, a lot of people that voted Republican, sadly, are no longer with us. They've passed away. So if you, as a party, if you don't have a way to engage young people to get in and provide the energy and the votes to do that, then that's a problem. You know what is a savior right now is demographically is people over age 65 have a much higher propensity to vote. People under age 30 don't vote as much. There's all this underutilized power among your generation because people just don't vote. I mean, that's crazy. But it's for Republicans, they're probably like, hey, that's great because they think they're not going to vote Republican. But the real issue is not Republican or Democrat. You talk about what's wrong with both parties. Take a state like New Hampshire. You can register, there's 3 basic ways. You're Republican, you Democrat, or you independent. The largest party in New Hampshire is independents. The other parties are shrinking. This thing we talked about on the 15% on the edge, those are getting, more and more people are getting disgusted, and they're saying, I'm leaving my party, I'm just going to be an independent. I'm going to vote for the person, not for the party. Because if the parties are about divisiveness and fundraising and getting out the vote on certain trigger issues, but they're not about solving problems, then people are voting with their feet and they're saying, I'm leaving each party and I'm just going to be part of this group of independents. Which then, then people say, oh, well, isn't this the year where you're going to have a third-party candidate that somehow would, step into the breach and make it on? It's an interesting thing. Mathematically, it's not going to work next year in 2024, and it's not going to work for ballot access and a bunch of things. But your generation probably should be thinking about what is the function of political parties, and is the system really working? Because both parties better get better at actually solving problems. Now, how do we know about this 70% in the middle? Well, when we got elected, we were running as an outsider in 2016. We were down 59 points in the poll with 5.5 months to go to the primary when we entered the race. And people came and said, you should drop out, don't run, not your turn. The person we're competing with had 100% name recognition, had been in politics for 40 years. We ran and we won by 40 points. 20 points in the primary, 40 in the general election. 16 was a good year for outsiders. In 2020, some of those outsiders didn't fare so well. We got reelected by 40 points. How do you get reelected by 40 points? You win 70-30. How do you win 70-30? You get the 70 people, the 70%, the huge majority, and then you have people screaming at you from both edges because you're like, oh, you're not as divisive in us. But that's the way you do it, and it's great to win by 40 points because it means you've got the majority of the people. So that's part of what I think the solution is that we've got to be better at actually solving problems that matter to the most number of people, and we have to show that young people that there's actually, that we're for something as opposed to just get something. And for Republicans, it needs to be about freedom, liberty, and limited government. And the party gets confused about that sometimes. The energy pieces that I want to wrap in here related to energy transitions is if you look at the globe and the demand for population and worldwide, we have like 1 billion people on the planet that got up this morning and lived in a place where there's no electricity. I mean, imagine, think about how we fare when we got a power outage for 2 hours or 4 hours or a bad storm for 24 hours. But think about your life growing up where there's no electricity in your life, and that affects everything: education, health, longevity, family size, all that stuff. So there's going to be a demand. So between now and 2050, when we talk about energy transitions, that's kind of the U.S. view of it. Because we're a country where essentially everybody's got electricity, everybody's got access to transportation, so how do we transition? For the rest of the world, it's energy addition. We need more energy to be able to increase the health and the welfare of everybody else. And why we'd say, why does America care about that? Well, we care about it because we're humans, we care about it because they're customers. When the rest of the world is safe and prosperous, the U.S. benefits having the world's largest economy because, we provide a lot of goods, and the work that we've done, establishing free markets and U.S. technology has lifted 1 billion people out of poverty in the world in the last 25 years. That's never happened in the history of mankind, where the world has actually become safer and healthier and more economically resilient because of the leadership of the United States. But you probably don't hear about that much, but that's actually happened. So then if you say we're going to have increasing demand, then we have to do all the above. We've got to have increases in all of these sources, but the idea that somehow where today close to 80% of the energy in the world comes from fossil fuels, getting the 80% down to zero and replacing it, and then growing the top line, it doesn't work. I mean, it would bankrupt the planet. There's not enough money, there's not enough resource, there's not enough rare earth minerals to create the batteries, there's not enough factories to make windmill blades, and then where do you dispose the windmill blades, where do you get rid of the batteries, all the recycling stuff that no one's figured out. But what we can do is do what we're in North Dakota, which is we can decarbonize liquid fuels. And we're doing it, and Iowa's going to play a big role in that, because you can take the easiest fuel that you can decarbonize in the world is ethanol. When you cook corn and take that corn, it's like a 1930s bootlegger still. When you cook it, you get alcohol, aka ethanol, and it's a great fuel. I mean, NASCARs run all their races on ethanol. You can run a car on 85% ethanol. I mean, it is like a great high-powered fuel. The CO2 that comes off of that as the other byproduct can be captured. It can be used for carbonating beverages. It can be used for, for enhanced oil recovery. And in North Dakota, we're doing that. We have two now permitted and operating ethanol plants that are capturing the CO2 and they're sequestering it, storing it safely underground permanently. We've got another group that's taking CO2 off of and I'm focusing on CO2 because that's the thing that people have identified as the problem. So you say, okay, it's not that fossil fuels are the problem, it's the CO2. So that's with innovation, you wouldn't try to kill the whole product. You'd say, how do we fix the issue related to the CO2? So take all the CO2 off of a gas plant in Wyoming, build a pipeline 105 miles through Montana into North Dakota. They inject that CO2 into the ground into some 1980s oil wells that have a depletion curve where they were producing about 20% of what they used to. By injecting the CO2, they're back up to about 90% of original production, and the CO2 stays in the ground, and there's 500 pounds more per CO2 staying in the ground than gets produced by that barrel that's produced. So that company is net negative. They have a net negative barrel of oil. They're greener than Patagonia. okay? And everybody's like, oh, I'm gonna buy from this green company. Well, using the same math, the same formula, we now have a oil company that's greener than Patagonia. So you take decarbonized gasoline, you take decarbonized ethanol, and all of a sudden, guess what? All of this math that says we should take all of your taxpayer dollars and subsidize at $7,500 per car an EV over an internal combustion engine because it was going to be cleaner. But the math to do that, you had to drive that EV like 170,000 miles, and then they didn't count in the fact that what do you have to do for the battery disposal. They didn't count in the fact that China's got 85% of the rare earth minerals, and that China's building those batteries in power plants, in plants where they're building the batteries and building the solar panels. They're all powered by coal. China has no oil and gas. They import that 10 million barrels of oil. They are hustling to have all EV cars, not because they care about the environment, but because they don't have oil and gas. I mean, the Washington Post wrote an article a couple of weeks ago, if you read it, praising China for they're accelerating their change to EVs faster than the US, aren't they great? Never mentioned the energy source. Every EV in China is run by coal, powered by coal, should be the bumper sticker on every one of those EVs. And these are 1980 coal plants they're building, not 2023 ones like we have in North Dakota, where we can actually decarbonize the baseload, because we've taken everything out of it so you can have a clean thermal baseload, which we need, because 40% of the electricity in America is still coming from thermal baseload. We can decarbonize that. So it is innovation, not regulation, is the answer to all of this. And I just want to say, for your generation, you've got to be critically thinking, because I feel like you've all been sold this idea that somehow that saving the planet, by being opposed to certain industries, when the people that are lobbyists are doing that are getting subsidies and all of these things that are allowing them to enrich themselves on a path that is actually empowering our adversary, China, because China doesn't have the rare earth minerals all within China. They, through their Belt and Road Initiative, they're tearing up Indonesia, they're tearing up Africa, and there's a reason why they call them rare earth minerals. They call them rare earth minerals because they're measured in parts per million. Parts per million. So you have to move sometimes 1 million pounds of earth to get what you need. There's certain minerals you have to move 100,000 pounds of material from a mining operation to get enough material to make one battery, which is then made in China in a plant by coal, sent to the US, and going into a car, which then we're subsidizing with taxpayer dollars to save the planet. When you could have today, made in America, decarbonized internal combustion machine. So I just say liquid fuels, that's Team USA. EV right now, that's Team China. Until that changes, because guess what? We do have rare earth minerals in our country, but you can't get out. There's 240 million acres of land that Theodore Roosevelt put away for all of you. He put it away and said that is for the benefit and the use of the American people for generations to come. Under the Biden administration, guess what? You can't mine rare earth minerals, you can't develop oil and gas, you can't really cut a tree. I mean, they're basically saying all of this stuff is supposed to be preserved as opposed to conserved. Conservation means sustainable use. Preservation means nobody sets foot on it. And whether it's taking places that are high in uranium and turning them into national monuments, when that's happened, now we're importing uranium into our country to run from Russia to run our 93 nuclear plants that we're providing baseload electricity, which, by the way, nuclear is another part of the solution for the future, because nuclear no one has ever died in America from a nuclear accident related to a power plant. Never, nobody, ever. And we kill, and I had somebody ask me, would you live next to a nuclear plant? I said, yes. Would you live there with your family? I said, yes. You're kidding. Why would you do that? And I said, well, when I was raising them on a farm in North Dakota, we lived next to a road. And they said, well, what does that have to do with it? I said, well, we kill 45,000 people a year on roads, and I let my kids drive on those roads, and we drove on those roads. And so, getting in your car is way more dangerous than living next to a nuclear plant. I mean, more people die of shark bites in this country, and more people have shark attacks, and more people have actually died getting mad at vending machines and then falling over on them than they have, from a nuclear thing. So that is a solution, but not if we have to get our uranium from Russia, because we can't mine it here. So some of it comes back to land use policy, and it comes back to common sense to be able to manage all that. And then, sir, for your question, I'll close when you said, hey, what about those policies? They do. I mean, it's pretty simple. On the economy, you actually, you actually have to have someone in charge who's actually cut government spending. When I say I cut government spending by 27%,
I'm familiar with your record.
yeah, I mean, it wasn't like we slowed growth from 10% to 8%. We actually reduced it from here to 27% below. And we can do the same thing in the federal government. Part of that is getting the federal government. Federal government does a bunch of stuff that's not their job. Either stop doing it or return it to the states. I mean, just get the federal government back in line with what the constitutional responsibilities they have. That's the fastest thing we can do. If we do that, then the interest rates are going to come down. And then when we start cutting red tape like we've done in North Dakota, let's say innovation, not regulation, sell energy to our friends and allies versus buy it from our adversaries. These are all straightforward things you can start on day one, and all of that is going to send the economy in a completely different direction. It's being choked right now by inflation and regulation, and it's being choked because of our energy policies, which are enabling foreign dictators and supporting China and hurting U.S. and U.S. manufacturing jobs. So with that, I'm going to just say thank you for being here. We'll stick around. Happy to talk to people one-on-one. Happy to get some pictures if anybody wants that. But again, want to thank Drake University. I want to thank all of you for coming here and spending time this afternoon. I want to thank Ashley and all of the hosts here. Dylan, thank you for all what you do, and appreciate everybody being here. And again, I would say good luck. Have a happy Thanksgiving, and good luck to Drake. Next Saturday against the Bison, but not too much luck. Okay, thank you.